Welcome to Ground Truth. Join Sam Faddis as he looks for truth from those on the ground, in the middle of the action with key insights regarding critical national and international issues. Listen for discussions and interviews on national security, terrorism, politics, espionage, the paranormal, and weapons of mass destruction.
Welcome. I'm Sam Faddis. This is WKCV 103.5 FM, the voice of Keystone College, what I would ordinarily call beautiful La Plume, Pennsylvania, although it's a little gray and drizzly outside right now. Today we're going to talk about something I think you're really going to want to dig into. I'm going to be talking to a lady named Sabrina de Sousa. I'm going to let Sabrina tell this story in her own words, but just to make sure everybody listening understands the context. Sabrina is convicted in an Italian court of law. She'll talk about the specific charges, but in essence, in my summary, her crime, and put that in quotations, would be being involved in an operation run by the CIA as part of the war on terror to grab a hold of an alleged Islamic extremist. A little strange that a NATO ally would be holding her. Even stranger, I think, that as far as we can see, our government doing absolutely nothing to help her, despite an alleged policy that we don't cut anybody away and we don't leave any behind. So that's all me just trying to frame the issue. Let's talk to the lady who knows this in detail. Sabrina, welcome.
Thank you.
So look, as I said in this intro, just trying to frame the issue here, you're going to be telling this story, and I largely defer to you to kind of walk us through this. But let's just start with some context. Where are you right now, and what are you allegedly convicted of? Why are you there? Where are you?
Okay, so I'm in Rome, Italy right now, and because the crime took place over here, the crime of kidnapping. In the U.S., it's called renditions, as part of the rendition and interrogation and detention program. So I'm serving a 3-year sentence via probation, largely thanks to President Trump, who facilitated the prison, removing the prison option. So I'm a former CIA operations officer to begin with, and I had the privilege of being one of a select few of officers to serve in a unique agency and, a unique mission. I also had the honor of representing the U.S. as a diplomat while on assignment in Italy. While here, I worked closely with our Italian intelligence and law enforcement officers on a bunch of different issues: national security, counter-terrorism. And really, this was, we are assigned overseas for the purpose of working jointly with our partners to protect the lives of the citizens in that country. In that case, this was Italy. So I was convicted of kidnapping because that's the crime, not renditions over here. And right after 9/11, the CIA approached Italian intelligence on a number of options, and one of them was renditions to combat terrorism. Now, just to be clear, that for many years, many decades in fact, Italy had always looked to the CIA to capture, in other words, kidnap, their citizens in other countries and bring them to Italy when extradition procedures were a little problematic in those countries. So it was not a new concept to the Italians. However, now I'm back in Italy 20 years later, but not as a diplomat, but one charged with this crime of kidnapping. In this case, it was a Muslim cleric who, in fact, finally was convicted of terrorism by Italy. So my sentence involves probation. I'm a lot of restrictions of movement. I can't leave Italy, can't leave the States. I've got police monitoring. And another very curious part of the probation is that I can't speak about the judicial process. That's a little bit strange. I can't publish anything or speak about it. And I think that, of course, it doesn't go really well with me in this situation. So a year after 9/11, the Rome station chief here in Italy presented Italian intelligence with a list of individuals with suspected ties to terrorism for the purpose of rendering them to their countries of origin. One such person was an Egyptian cleric living in Milan. The Italian police, though, already had this individual under technical and physical surveillance 24/7. But the Rome station chief required to check a few boxes in order to be able to move forward with this rendition. Italy's a NATO country, so the Rome station chief had to go up really high up in the Italian government, all the way up to the office of the prime minister, to obtain approval to go ahead with this rendition. And Egypt, since he was Egyptian, had to agree to take the cleric, which they did, even though there were no pending arrest warrants against the cleric. The Rome station chief said he obtained the approval of very senior officials, the movers, the shakers, the facilitators in this government, those who had long-standing relationships with the CIA. These officials, and the reason I'm spending some time on this because it will come up again, is that these officials operate between the office of the prime minister, below that, and above the intelligence agencies. So with the prime minister, if something goes wrong, there's plausible deniability. And then, of course, you can dig down and find a few scapegoats among the Italian intelligence should something actually go wrong, which actually happened. So we had those approvals. Then the rendition went forward. The ongoing Italian police surveillance of the Egyptian cleric stopped. And then there was an Italian carabinieri officer who kicked off the rendition by positively identifying this cleric for pickup. Many hours later, the cleric arrives in Egypt. He's incarcerated, and he alleges torture at the hands of the Egyptians. Now, what follows next is nothing short of astounding. The Egyptians interrogated the cleric and came away empty-handed. An Egyptian judge, therefore, ordered the cleric's release. So one would say, what happened? Well, the Egyptians assumed that the CIA Rome station chief had the evidence needed to prosecute the cleric, and Rome assumed that the Egyptians had the evidence since they had agreed to take the cleric. Each one assumed the other had the evidence, and neither of them had the evidence to prosecute this cleric. So here's a cleric already under investigation in Italy, is snatched, flown all the way to Cairo only to be released. So that begs the question, why did CIA headquarters even approve this rendition? Why did these very high-level Italian government officials facilitate first and then approve the rendition of this cleric already under investigation, only to convict him years later? This turned out to be a colossal, expensive misunderstanding. This operation ruined the lives of many American and Italian intelligence officers, and predictably, those who authorized and facilitated this operation just skated free. Now, for this colossal misunderstanding, the government turned their backs on us, neither confirming nor denying this rendition took place. I am serving a sentence for this misunderstanding. And most of all today, as a mother, for this colossal misunderstanding, I will miss my only child, my son's wedding, next month, since I'm not allowed to leave Italy. This is heartbreaking for me, just because of the reason for why all of this happened.
So, Sabrina, let me jump in here to go off in a little bit of a tangent, or maybe just refine a point that I think you're touching on. Uh-huh. What you're describing here is an operation that, however it ends, probably never should have taken place. But as far as I know, there's exactly one person who's been sort of hung out to dry, to use that expression, and that would be you. Now, why are you the only, I'm going to use the word, why are you the scapegoat for this? Where are all of the other people that were involved in this operation on both sides, and why have none of them, if we're going to treat this as something where somebody needs to be held accountable, why isn't anybody else on the hook for this?
So you have to go back a little ways. Once these charges were coming out and the indictments and arrest warrants were being issued, my big concern, since I'm a naturalized U.S. citizen, was my family that lived abroad. My mother in particular was old and she was sick. And I asked the CIA, I said, please let me go see her. I'll take the long way. I'll pay the extra money. I won't go through Europe because the arrest warrant was in Europe. And they said no. And the reason they gave me was to protect the identities and the careers of other officers. In other words, the ones who had screwed up. This to me was like adding insult to injury. This was such an injustice that I resigned so I could go see my mother. I lost my pension. And then I decided I would fight the charges against me. I started to do that. I followed all the procedures internally in the CIA. I went to Congress, and then I also found out because of it that John Brennan, who was the director of the CIA at the time, excluded me from any resolution with the Italians. In other words, I wasn't on the list for pardons for the Italians, and I was left on my own to fight all these charges, to deal with everything myself. And that's exactly what happened. And one of the things, and the charges are huge. One of them, I'm responsible for a crime against humanity. I mean, my lawyer tried to argue that in court without any success, which means now I have to take this charge to a court outside of Italy. I mean, how can a joint terrorism operation turn into a crime against humanity? I mean, and all the Italians, by the way, got immunity, all of them, and the CIA pushed for a few pardons. This has a chilling effect on any sort of joint partnership we're ever going to have, and really sets us back, in this war on terror. I then had to take a few drastic steps, and one of those, of course, was to go to Portugal to try and resolve the situation on my own. I mean, I just didn't land up in Portugal. When I went there, it was, I had teamed up, with the Portuguese government, with the Portuguese member of the EU Parliament to see if I could reopen the case and fight these charges against me. The thing that I ran into, I was in Portugal for 4 months before suddenly Portugal turned around and just really wanted to get rid of me. And at the time, I couldn't figure out what was going on and why. Well, now we know what was going on in Italy, right, at the time. This was ground zero for the insurance policy, Mifsud, Spygate, Link University, the attempt to bring down the President of the United States by John Brennan, targeting Americans. So anytime I tried to bring up the idea of, a retrial. In fact, Italy said in part of the extradition, fine, even I was going to be extradited, we'll give you a retrial. Well, the government came in and said no retrial. And then in the meanwhile, in Italy, as a matter of fact, some intelligence officers filed a lawsuit because they found a document that could exonerate them. They were immediately shut down. They had death threats, etc. And I think the last thing that happened was John Brennan showed up in Portugal during the transition period. During the transition period, Trump had come into office. He shows up, and I found out about this from the chief of Portuguese intelligence, who conveyed this message to my lawyer. Brennan's job was to make sure I was immediately sent to Italy and to prison. In effect, that would have silenced me. I wouldn't be able to deal with my case anymore. And then one has to ask why. You know as well as I do that when the CIA has people they trust and, to do something for them, collaborate with them. In this case, the same movers, shakers, and facilitators for the Milan rendition more than likely were being used right now to help with this Spygate operation to direct Mifsud and the other individuals here in Italy. So nobody wanted someone like myself or those Italian intelligence officers to shine a light on this case, reopen it, and inadvertently highlight the names of these individuals who have never actually showed up in court records. So John Brennan shows up a day later. In fact, my poor mother passed away, and I asked to go to the funeral. The Portuguese government said no. They said, you're going to Italy right away. Except I had surgery, it got delayed, and thankfully President Trump came into office. He and General Flynn immediately moved to get me out of prison. I was in prison in Portugal, but I still had to serve this 3-year sentence. The administration was working really hard on this issue when everything suddenly came to a screeching halt. Gina Haspel was named deputy. Now, Gina Haspel, if any director knows everything about the Milan rendition, it's Gina Haspel. Why? Because she was Jose Rodriguez, chief of CDC, who approved this rendition, his chief of staff. She was his chief of staff when they buried this whole case, when the investigation started and coughed up a few of us scapegoats at the time. And, one would think that she would, in fact, speak up about this, about the injustice of this whole situation, about the fact that this rendition should never have taken place. Instead, I got to hear that there's an agreement in place with the Italians that includes me and the Rome station chief. That's what Brennan was trying to do, get me to prison, and the Rome station chief who got this whole operation going in the first place would have his arrest warrant dropped, which happened last year. I didn't go to prison, so when Gina Haspel came in, she picked up where Brennan left off. That's why I'm sitting here in Italy right now. And there's something more to it, and I would really like to know what it is, because this sentence that's supposed to end, there's no end in sight for it. So there's something missing that I don't know yet.
So, Sabrina, let me go back to something that you covered, and I think you did well a couple of minutes ago, but I just want to make sure that we emphasize this and that I understand clearly what you said. So you, at some point, were sitting in Portugal. I think you said you were there for a number of months. And then
4 months, yeah.
And then as I understand it, at some point you were effectively taken into custody by the Portuguese. Is that right?
Yes, the Portuguese initiated. This is completely unexpected. This is something the Portuguese could not do. And it was so unexpected. They initiated the extradition. And when they did, then only Italy came back and issued the warrant.
Right, so you're sitting in Portugal, you're there for an extended period of time. I mean, this wasn't like you were in the airport for 15 minutes. You're on their soil for months. They're not doing anything to you. All of a sudden, they initiate the apprehension of, assuming we accept the allegations, of the apprehension of a CIA officer who did her job, assuming I'm accepting without making judgment the allegations. And then Brennan, the head of the Central Intelligence Agency, arrives in country. And he doesn't come to the rescue, and he doesn't come to negotiate your release, and he doesn't return with a CIA officer who's been rescued from abroad. He comes into country, stays for a little while, and basically as soon as he's gone, the Portuguese hand you over to the Italians. Is that accurate?
Yes. In fact, what happened was they circumvented their own process. The process hadn't ended for me to fight the extradition.
I see.
It just stopped.
So they not only hand you over, but they expedite it. They speed up the process.
They expedite, right?
Right. So that.
And when I got to Portugal a couple of months after I was there, I got a message from someone from CIA headquarters, someone I knew, and she said, "You know what? Bad things are going to happen to you, just to let you know." And that's when all the bad things started happening to me, because I ended up in prison for 10 days. And, I almost died at one point when I was being transported from Porto to Lisbon in preparation for the flight the next day, because the 3 Interpol officers were already the Italian ones were already sitting in Lisbon. I was suffocating. I was handcuffed, and I couldn't breathe, and I was hammering on this padded door, and I was thinking to myself, what a way to die. I mean, we join, we go to the front lines, we go into embassies, we don't know if we'll go home the next day, and we give our lives, for a cause, and we get a star on the wall, and here I am, I'm just going to die for a stupid reason, a rendition that should have never taken place over a misunderstanding, and no one has been held accountable. And I've had to fight this by myself all these years. And I'm sorry, and I'm really disappointed a little bit that, the president has made me an exception in this. Because, he's tried to bring everyone home. He tried to, did a lot for me initially, but I don't know why everything stopped or who told him what that made, him stop.
So to touch on, let me touch on this, because we've got a few minutes left. I want to touch on this Brennan thing one more time. Excuse me if I'm beating a dead horse, but I want to make sure, I know you're immersed in this, and I'm intimately familiar with your case, but obviously a lot of people that are listening are not nearly as immersed, and I want to make sure this is clear. So, you're in Portugal. The Portuguese, who are not exactly eager on any particular day to apprehend American intelligence officers, all of a sudden take you into custody. The head of the
They were going to help me. They said they were going to help me. I went in with authorization from the highest levels of the government. I just didn't walk in and put them in a bad situation.
Right. And the head of our Central Intelligence Agency, John Brennan, the same guy implicated, as you indicated, in all of this stuff related to Trump, goes to the trouble to fly to Portugal, is on the ground in Portugal, and the only impact of that is the Portuguese who were going to help you suddenly expedite a process to send you to Italy. And to prison. And here's, the thing that I wanted to add to what we had talked about a couple of minutes ago is, if I understood what you were saying earlier, that it's your very strong impression or belief or knowledge, maybe you tell me, that the reason he does this is because the longer you call attention to your case, the more likely it is that people are going to end up focusing on folks who were involved in Brennan's ongoing efforts vis-a-vis Trump at the time, particularly senior Italians. In other words, you have to go away and be shut up because you're starting to ask questions and shine a light somewhere that is going to uncover his actions in regard to the president.
Absolutely. At the time, they made no sense. But again, it wasn't just even my actions, but also of those of the Italian intelligence officers. They got shut up real fast by the Italian Prime Minister Renzi, who allegedly seems to be part of this whole thing too. There was a concerted effort, and it really is, if you sit back and think about it, here I go to Portugal and walk right into this thing that was going on that I didn't know anything about at the time. Now it all makes sense. All these actions now make sense. This is, that group of facilitators, the movers, shakers, they're powerful people, and Brennan would have gone back to them. And then I'm for sure at least one or two of them are there. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone through all this trouble to try and silence myself and the other Italian intelligence officers. I'm pretty sure about that.
Well, Sabrina, look, we're out of time, but I want to thank you for taking the time to talk about this.
Thank you for letting me talk about it.
Well, look, as you noted earlier in what you were saying, having spent some time doing the job myself, you're told that you're out on the edge and you're doing dangerous things and you're serving your country and that nobody will forget you. We don't leave anybody behind. We don't cut anybody away. And I know that you and I both know that we live by that creed in the field. And it's just inexcusable, intolerable for anybody to do anything to the contrary. But then that's not surprising given Mr. Brennan's proclivities. Thank you for being with us.
Yeah. Thank you, Sam.
And thank you for listening, and we'll be with you next time on Ground Truth.